Hey guys, what's up? Excoundrel here, and today I'm going to be covering a video that is quite close to my heart. I'm going to be talking about Vainglory Esports, something that I've been incredibly passionate about for the last few years, and I've really enjoyed my time in that specific space. I'm not saying that my time is done in Vainglory Esports, but for right now it's unclear what opportunities there are, and therefore it's difficult for me to know where I would be headed in that instance. I want to make clear that from the standpoint of this video, I'm going to be as neutral as I physically can. I support my colleagues, and I support Humanist, I support Dowsey and Stress, and anything that they wish to pursue in terms of what they feel is right, I will be behind them as a colleague. However, I am in the unique position as the only caster that is not, in inverted commas, owed any money, because we'll get to that owed part when we get to it, because it's muddied waters. But I'm the only caster that's not owed any money from the pre-season because I was away working the League of Legends EU Masters during that time. So the agreement with me was that I wouldn't be paid for that anyway. And so therefore I'm in a unique position where I have no grievances with SEMC. So there is no grievance for me there because there's nothing, it's just a neutral relationship. They've supported my content creation and I've had a great time working with them in the past year. Now, I will start with last year, but since we're on that topic. The first thing is that I was paid a very handsome amount to cast Vainglory Esports, more than I should have been paid. If I were to reflect back on how much I got paid for Vainglory last year, it was more than I think was appropriate. However, you expect, given where you are, that things would only continue to go up, right? So the situation that I was in, I felt, well, if this is the rate that I'm on, then that's great. Then I think things must be going really well. Obviously, that wasn't the case. But I think if I were to reflect on last year, and if I knew this was going to be the case this year, I probably wouldn't have taken the pay that I took for doing Vainglory Esports last year. But that's a reflection, and I'm being perfectly open and honest about that. If we talk about Vainglory expenditure as a whole last year in terms of esports, it was probably in excess of 2 to 3 million. Now, I'm not going to name who was in charge of that expenditure, but I can tell you that most of it probably went on venue hiring for the live events and also went on the hotels for the live events. The hotels that we stayed in for live events were ridiculously good. Like, better than any other esport that I have ever worked in. I would have been happy with like a travel lodge, like your bog standard 2 or 3 star hotel, but we got put up in some ridiculously nice hotels. Now, obviously this creates a great image, and the players love it and the talent loves it, but it was an expenditure that was unnecessary. As were the venues. I think some of the venues that were hired were not fit for purpose and were probably expensive to hire in their own right. So I think if I were to redo Vainglory Esports, if I was doing it, it would be lower cost hotels and venues fit for purpose, because that's really what I would have gone for. But that's water gone by. What last year created was an expectation for pro players, especially pro players where this is their first esport. They are very young. They think that this is something that can be long-term and sustainable because there isn't any indication otherwise. And some of the talent even were in this situation as well. And this created an expectation that this was Vainglory Esports, and the money was there, the salaries were good, and this could be a career for you. That was the mistake that SEMC made. The SEMC made the mistake of funding esports to an incredible level when the game itself could not support that. They were running tier 1 level esports events for an audience of a tier 3 esport, because that's what Vainglory. Look, don't get me wrong, the World Championship had great viewer numbers, and they showed that if you can incentivize viewing, then you will get good viewers on the Vainglory streams. But the overall day-to-day workings of the Vainglory esports scene was a tier 3 esport. It wasn't the likes of League of Legends, but they were running events that were kind of almost at that stage. Not quite really League of Legends stage, but you get my idea, that they were batting well above their esports weight in terms of what they did last year. Now, I loved all the events. I loved being part of them. I think they were all amazing experiences, but they probably weren't financially suitable for where Vainglory was as a game. Because I think one of the things that we felt from this year is that Vainglory didn't do as well, I think, as they wanted it to do. I don't know. I don't have access to that kind of information, but it definitely feels like a lot of that money that was spent on esports has now been funneled back into the game to say, We would rather spend $2 to $3 million a year on marketing and game features than we would to spend on esports. So obviously for the grand population of Vainglory, that's great because that's only going to improve experiences in game for them. For the very small bubble of us that were in esports, that's terrible because that's player livelihoods, caster livelihoods, some of them, kind of flushed down the drain in a way, because it went from being all glitter, all stars, which was artificially inflated, to nothing almost. We'll get to that, but almost. So coming into this year, we had the conversations with SEMC about expectations for casting and what we can be paid and that kind of thing. From the get-go, our pay was cut by about 50%, 50-ish%, which was explained to us from the premise that they were not going to spend as much on esports this year. They wanted to focus on the core game. They wanted the game to be the main priority and esports to be something that they could grow organically. So we started initial contract discussions with SEMC, talking about what we can get paid, and that was initial contract discussions. I'm going to move on to the humanist part now, and then we're going to discuss esports as a whole afterwards, because we're kind of leading into this story. Initial contract discussions had a year rate for us that we would be paid monthly from April, I believe. That was the discussions of the contract. The overall outcome was that we never signed a contract. So I want to make that very clear right now. None of us signed anything. And it is a lesson to learn at this point that you shouldn't work without signing a contract. All of us should know that. I mean, obviously, we are in the esports industry and this happens all the time. However, given past experiences with SEMC, if I invoiced SEMC, I got paid 2 days later. I mean, they were the quickest company for paying me anything ever. I only ever had positive experience in terms of invoicing them, expenses, everything they were happy to do. And I think with the fiscal responsibility that they've kind of taken on this year, they trying to boil it down to more like a manageable monthly payment. So the initial discussions were, this is what you get paid on a monthly basis, starting in preseason, blah, 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 blah. We had our contracts shown to us, but we never got to the point where we were able to sign them, because then what happened is that ESP took over Vainglory Esports. ESP were given the entirety of Vainglory Esports, and that meant they were given our contracts as well. So we went from having a contract with SEMC that never got signed to having a potential contract with ESP that initially was supposed to remain the same. So all of the negotiated rates that we had negotiated but not signed were supposed to be honored with an ESP contract. ESP were under the impression, I think, that SEMC were going to continue to fund that, but they were going to fund ESP to fund us. So it would be like a roundabout way, but just trying to core and centralize everything with ESP Gaming for Vainglory Esports. So this is Humanist's perspective. Humanist agreed to a rate for the year on a monthly basis starting in preseason. It was an agreement that he held in good faith because of his past experiences working with SEMC, where payments and agreements had all been 100% fine. We didn't sign the contract though, but Humanist entered into the preseason and worked in the preseason under the impression that that would be honored. Now, I want to make it very clear that we were not offered nothing if the contract wasn't honored. ESP offered us $150 per broadcast, which is for most people probably a very, very good rate. But for people who have worked in the industry, and for a Saturday and Sunday for 6 weekends in a row to make $300 on a weekend, for people like us who need to make a complete living, it's not an amount where you can say I absolutely will commit to that 100%. Because if I got another gig at the weekend, which is prime esports time, for any other money, that's usually going to be greater than $150, I'd have to dump the Vainglory and say I'm sorry. But that was not really an option we were given. It was like kind of expected to be there essentially. So Humanist went into this agreement saying, well, I will work for $150 a day, but on the pretense on the expectation that my original contract payment is going to be honoured, and ESP were under the impression that would be fine as well. As far as I'm aware, I'm not really sure, because I wasn't dealing with that communication directly. So Humanist was thought that he was going to get the $150 a day on top of whatever his negotiated contract rate was. Somewhere towards the end of the preseason, it transpired that the contract agreements that we never signed but had agreed, or agreed in inverted commas, were not going to be honoured due to whatever reason. There was some problems with the partnership between ESP and SEMC. However, the $150 a day would still be honoured. $150 a day absolutely would be honoured. So you'd still get paid for the work that you did. There was not that we're not going to get paid anything. It was just that the initial agreed rate for the month was not going to be honoured. Because of whatever reason, fiscal responsibility, cutting down on esports expenditure. So you need to look at this from two sides of the story. The side of the story of the casting talent, excluding me because I was never going to get paid for this section anyway. The casting talent of that they expected this rate, even though there wasn't a contract on the board. They acted in good faith on a verbal agreement that this would be the rate that they would get. And they performed duties in the preseason based on expectations that they were going to make a certain amount of money and prioritize that over other gigs. The side of ESP, there's three sides to this story. The side of ESP is that ESP didn't know what their final contract would look like with SEMC. They expected whatever was suggested to us to hold true, and it didn't. However, they did offer us a flat day rate, which most of us accepted, and they have honoured that. They have honoured it with me anyway. I think I might be the only one that's actually gone down that route of taking that payment yet, but they honoured it with me, and ESP have been incredibly good to me in that way. ESP definitely have become a bit of a scapegoat in this situation. They have really done nothing wrong. And when I move on to the full esports side of things, I will talk about that. But they have done very little wrong in this situation, and ESP shouldn't be blamed for this at all. Then the side of SEMC is that they announced the VPL partnership with ESP Gaming in February, I believe. Now, I assume there was definitely some scope of toning down the overall expenditure for esports. But what I assume happened is after that announcement, that got hit even harder. So the initial thought was, okay, we're going to spend less on esports. I'm guessing after that announcement, it came that we're spending almost nothing on esports. So they had to basically say, oh, fuck, we have announced this. How do we sort this out now? And so obviously a lot of people in SEMC were put under in an awkward position where they were like, right, well, because I can't tell you where that decision came from, but if I were a speculator, I would guess it's from the investors. And the investors, being a small startup company which is primarily funded by venture capitalists, I would say that the investors are the board that needs answering to. So I'm guessing it came from the board, and they were like, that's way too much expenditure last year, we're going to cut it down. Oh wait, we're going to cut it down even further. So a lot of people in SEMC were put in awkward positions where they had expected a certain product for the esports this year, and that just turned out to not be the case. So obviously everybody in this situation is put in a really awkward position because it's the talent who were promised. Okay, promised is an awkward word to use. There was a verbal expectation that was what they would be paid, and they undertook the work because of what they were offered to be paid. ESP, who didn't know where they stood in terms of an agreement with SEMC, expected things to be fine, and made the extra offer on top, which was very generous of them, of that $150. And then SEMC, who probably over the course of a few months and several meetings, which probably took a while to organise, had been told that they would not have the money that they thought they would for esports expenditure, and therefore partnerships and deals and everything that comes along with that would have to be rethought and renegotiated, which takes time. So what you're seeing now in the Vainglory Esports world is the result of that. The time it takes to renegotiate and find your feet again after what you've originally planned goes to shit. And that's really what has happened here. ESP are a partner of the Vainglory Esports program, and ESP are taking on pretty much in the entirety of European and North American Vainglory Esports. So they are, at the moment, I'm aware, are pretty much fully funding it themselves, operating at a loss, trying to organize something off their own back for the love of Vainglory. I'm sure there is a little bit extra to it. I'm sure there is a partnership agreement with SCMC in there somewhere, but I don't know what that is. But I do know that having talked to SCMC today, that there will be esports for multiple regions, but it's a matter of reworking those partnerships that went awry somewhere in sort of the early to middle portion of this year. So the things that I can take from definite for this situation is that ESP still haven't figured out what their partnership agreement with SCMC is going to be, and therefore they don't know what scope they can offer in terms of the setup for the Vainglory Esports events. Secondly, SCMC's top-down decision from the board has left them reeling in terms of which partnerships they had originally set up, and now they are scrambling to create a competitive aspect that bears true to the fiscal responsibility that they have to adhere to. And this, as a result, has delayed everything. So that's why you're seeing the delay. It's a delay based on a multitude of factors. I'll be honest, to announce these partnerships with there being any risk of them going to shit is a fuck up, and SCMC definitely fucked up. As per usual, communication has been dire, like absolutely dire. And I am at the end of my tether in a way with the way that the communication has been for SCMC. You know, in parts of me just wish let me do it. Just let me be your communicator, because I do a good job of communicating, and I will make sure people know what's going on, even if that know what's going on is just something to say. Look, guys, we're struggling. You know, we have to delay our plans for this year due to some partnership problems. Rest assured, we are trying to make it work, and we are committed to creating a competitive esports scene for Vainglory. But to say nothing is even worse. People would rather have little or no hope than false hope, which is a really good tweet that I got, and I've stolen it. Sorry. So that is my perspective on the situation. So that is my balanced view of everything that has had and led up to this moment. My biggest sadness is for the players who, in the realms of last year, where the expenditure was wild and far too much, had an expectation for Vainglory that could not be lived up to this year. I think that the fiscal responsibility probably needed to happen, but to build up expectations of VPL and then to just try and quietly sweep it under the rug with little or no communication is a really bad move. And if I were in SCMC's shoes, I would have said something about the delay even though it affects such a minor portion of the overall player base. Esports is 1 to 2% max, of the Vainglory player base. I would have still said something. I would have just... And do you know what? I've learned from my time in the gaming industry? People just value honesty. If something has gone wrong, you don't need to be this PR machine say like, oh, everything's fine, no, we're going to be great. No, if something goes wrong, you just be honest about it. You just say, look, guys, we were planning a massive EPL, but due to some problems with partnerships or problems with internally, we've had to delay this, and we're going to try and rework it, but we are committed to making this work, and we will be trying to bring something, and as soon as we have more concrete news, we'll offer that. But to say nothing is worse, Anyway, this has been really long. I didn't even realize I've been talking for nearly 20 minutes. That's everything that I can tell you about what I know of what's happened with Vainglory. But the end points are I understand Humanist's position, because it was an agreement to work for these dates for an agreed amount verbally, and he took the work thinking that this was going to be the case. I feel bad for ESP because they're kind of stuck in the middle of it, yet they are trying to create a Vainglory Esports scene off their own back. SCMC, the people at SCMC are definitely put in an awkward position, and it's probably a result of this fiscal responsibility that they've had to employ this year. However, the decisions that they're making, whilst are bad for the esports scene, are likely better for the game in general. And there was, from my meetings with SCMC, whilst I can't go into details because I don't want to give you guys false hope, they did say that they are committed to creating a competitive scene for Vainglory this year. Hope that has given you some kind of better insight. I rambled for a very long time. And thank you very much for watching if you did. I'll see you soon.